Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod coming at you with our fifth Big Ten team preview. Rod's projected number 14 seed, the Northwestern Wildcats. Please stop right now and leave a quick 5-star written review on your podcast player to help the algorithms lead other Spartans to the show. Rod and I would really appreciate it. Okay, so before, those of you watching YouTube, you can see it. My face actually kind of works now. It's going to be kind of strange for those of you watching on YouTube because we were pre-recording these. So I was in the midst of Bell's palsy when it began, and it has been quite the dramatic reversal in the last four or five episodes, which is good. So that's I'm kind of almost back to normal, as at least as far as my face goes. That's all comment too. Okay, Rod, let's talk about the Northwestern Wildcats, which had, we talked about Nebraska last, which had kind of a strange season and sort of strange last couple of years, I feel like, in some respects, or at least tenure under Hoiberg. And Chris Collins has also had an interesting tenure, although his has been much more positive. We were at the point where a couple of years ago, we were kind of questioning whether Collins would survive at Northwestern.
Yep.
That was, and it wasn't, I don't think we felt like there's a hot seat, but like the hot seat was out there. Potentially it could come. And then he just has run off two NCAA tournament appearances, two NCAA tournament wins, which is two more than Nebraska has, and has easily become the most successful basketball coach in the history of Northwestern Wildcats, and has that job for, I suspect, as long as he wants, barring some weird thing that he does that, like a Mel Tucker sort of instance. So Northwestern last year had you could look at it from the outside, not knowing anything about how the season progressed. You'd say it was not very good. They were 17-16, 7-13 in the league, certainly disappointing over what they potentially were going to do. But that is on the heels of some major injuries to Brooks Barnhiser, got hurt about, halfway through the year.
Yeah.
And then he never came back. Jalen Leach went out about 3 weeks after that. And, Northwestern, to Chris Collins' credit, I think in some respects, they don't have a really deep team, yet they were able to stay competitive, stay like not an easy win. They're a tough team to play even without those players. And so anyway, they lost some games, a bunch of them close, and they were a good team that just because of the injuries, they just didn't have, the horses to keep up in the league later in the season.
I think that was really it. It's a funny thing, as you say, when you look at that record, and you're inclined, if you didn't know any better, if you weren't watching it, you would say, well, not a great year, right? And disappointing
Right.
coming off back-to-back NCAA tournament bids, a lot of success. But the only way you could fairly conclude that is if you didn't watch the season, because if you watched, you know how much they got hurt and derailed by their injury problems. And then when you look at what they did once that happened, um, he made them competitive again. And I give Chris Collins a ton of credit for that. He's done, I think in recent years, he's done, if not, he's definitely in the upper tier of the league in terms of developing talent. Because if you look at the guys that they've had come through, we'll be talking about Nick Martinelli in a few minutes. He's an example. Barnhiser was another example. These guys that were recruited, they were long-term players, and they just get better every single year. And we're not just meaning marginal improvement. We mean to the point where by the time they're juniors and seniors, they're all conference level players.
Yeah. Right.
He did a great job with, people will, and I'm sure I don't need to tell Michigan State fans about this, but the development of Boo Buie was such a huge
Oh no.
factor.
Yeah.
And really that was, you're right about going back just, 3 years ago, let's say. And I don't think we'd ever reach the point where we were necessarily thinking, well, this is it. But it was starting to get there because remember, Collins had that breakthrough several years back now, where he finally broke the streak. He finally got them into the NCAA tournament, and then they got there and they won a game. Big deal. And he was recruiting well, and it looked like he was going to make them at least a semi-regular tournament level team. But he had the group that followed that initial class, or a couple of classes that he had, where they had Vic Law and McIntosh and those guys that got them over the hump. The group that followed them was very highly regarded. Pete Nance was a big
Nance,
part of
yep.
that. There were some other guys the shooter. I'm drawing a blank at his name, 6'7" shooter that transferred to Indiana. Um, just
Cobb.
really, those guys never quite delivered on
Yeah.
their potential. And that was, I think that is what made you wonder. And then the recruiting didn't quite stay at that level, at least on the surface. So you had to wonder, well, God, is this it? Did he already have his apex? And then enter upperclassman Boo Booey. They had some other
Yep.
guys around him that did the job. And lo and behold, you have back to back tournament seasons. Unfortunately, last year they weren't able to sustain that streak again because of the injuries. But I give him credit for making them a very difficult team to beat, even when they were way down in firepower. And as you say, he's not only based on what he did in terms of the way the school will look at him. Um, he's got a job at Northwestern, I think, for as long as he wants it. But the other thing now is, and this was something that I know we speculated about on this show in the immediate aftermath of that first tournament breakthrough. The question was, well, is Collins going to trade up? Is he going to leave
Yeah.
Northwestern for greener pastures? And, the way college athletics are now, I guess you can never say never. But to me, it feels like that's not an extremely likely thing anymore because he's starting to get, not that he's old, but he's starting to get older. So he's no longer a guy that a school could look at and say, hey, we're getting a 42-year-old. We could have him for 20 years. That's not
Right.
quite the deal. And I think he's got a comfort level there. Now, what's interesting is I have heard, and not a lot of specifics, just a general sense, they, and it kind of belies because I think his public image is actually really good, but I've heard he can be a tough guy to work with. Um, but yet he seems to be very entrenched in Evanston, and it's home for him. He grew up in the Chicagoland area, you know, so it makes sense that for a lot of reasons that this is kind of his forever job, and I think Northwestern will gladly keep him because if the last 3 years have proven anything, it's that the best of what Chris Collins can do is pretty good for a program
Yeah.
with Northwestern's pedigree. It's pretty good. You're certainly
Yeah.
not likely to do any better at that school.
Yeah.
So
You can, well, I mean, he's certainly been the most successful, and you could argue that he's probably better than pretty good for the resources he has to operate with at Northwestern to have
uh,
an element of success where he's what, third in the Big Ten or second in the Big Ten a couple of years ago. I mean,
yep,
that
absolutely.
was kind of crazy in some respects, right? Like it's totally
Yeah.
unexpected.
And
And yeah.
and I think, I'll admit I was a fan of his predecessor. I thought Bill Carmody was a really good
Hmm.
basketball coach. And prior to Chris Collins, he was the best I'd ever seen at Northwestern. If you remember, he had some very good players. Kevin Coble, John Sherna, had some forwards that were really, really good scorers. And he had Northwestern on several occasions get right to the edge of being a tournament team and just come up short. Happened to
Yeah.
him 2 or 3 times. And I really wondered about them firing him. He had a long run. It's not like they didn't give him a long runway,
Right. Like
but
10 years. Yeah.
it felt to me like, are you really going to do better? And I wasn't sure that, the Coach K coaching tree is not great in terms of this. A lot of those guys, not all of them, but a lot of those guys have been fired
Yeah.
and didn't match the hype when they got jobs initially. So I wondered about that, but hey, he's done it. There is no doubt about it. He's made Northwestern, as they proved last year, even in years where they're behind the 8 ball for whatever reason, they're still going to be a tough out when you play them.
Yeah. And I feel like the difference too between him and Bill Carmody, I mean, aside from the level of success that Collins obviously had, Carmody still felt like a gimmicky program, like
That's a good point. That's
someone who had accepted the fact that I'm Northwestern, I'm not going to have the resources. I got to find some weird way to win. I'm going to play slow
yeah.
basketball, like Princeton like basketball. And
And
Collins,
they
if you
also
watch the team,
defensively, don't forget, they also played a
yeah,
1-3-1 zone. That was the
Exactly. Yeah.
real gimmick stuff.
Right. Yeah. And so Collins, you watch the team, and yeah, they'll have some stuff like they'll throw zones, but
Yep.
it doesn't feel like an out of the ordinary team. Like
Not at
not a
all.
team that's doing something strange. And you'll see that all the time in like football. You'll see like Georgia Tech decides to run the triple option or something in the ACC or something, very unusual, just that because you're not used to seeing it. I mean, in some ways you could argue Syracuse was always that way with their zone. But it was,
But I think what's salient to me about the point you're making is, um, if you are relying on gimmicks, or you're relying on throwing unusual looks at people to succeed, you have to be skeptical of the sustainability of that.
exactly.
Because
Or the ability to recruit the right
Collins,
types of players because other players might not would play gimmicky basketball.
Chris Collins basically plays a straight up version of basketball. Mostly
Yep.
man defense. His offense, they don't run, but they look, you're right. They look like a lot of other Big Ten teams. They're in that general wheelhouse. So the fact that they do that and have the success that they've had probably suggests that it is, to one degree or another, sustainable. Like,
Yeah.
I think he's shown enough that you can look at them now. And I'll say this before we get into the particulars of this team. I probably got them, where do I have them? 14th. I
14th. Yep.
probably got them. You could argue I might have them a notch or two higher than maybe the talent would indicate, although it's a close call. But I think that's my point. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt over a couple of other teams that are pretty equal to them,
Yeah.
primarily because of the track record. Chris Collins has shown some things now. Like, we talked about Fred Hoiberg, right? Fred Hoiberg, tons of success at Iowa State, but he's now got a serious track record in Nebraska. And it's not as good as the one Chris Collins has at Northwestern. It's just
Right.
not.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so, the other thing, of course, with Chris Collins is whenever there are coaching openings, especially in the Big Ten, it is funny because we obviously get exposed to Michigan State, all the speculation, what Izzo leaves, who's going to replace Izzo, and Collins' name is just bandied about quite often. But I can tell you that the coaching search in Iowa, lots of people were talking about Chris Collins, and completely convinced that Chris Collins would absolutely leave Northwestern to go to Iowa because Iowa was so much, a much much better program than Northwestern.
Yeah, I think that all
Everybody seems
worked
to
out.
think.
That worked out well for everybody. I
I
think
think it
Iowa
did.
got the right guy. I think Chris Collins is in the right place
But I do
uh,
think it's
for
interesting that
him.
his name gets thrown around a lot, and I think for the reasons you mentioned that he's youngish, but that he's a success in a
Not
place where people.
anymore. Yeah,
Well,
he's
no,
not.
right,
He's not. If you were talking like when he had that first breakthrough, like 2016, whatever. Let's keep in mind, hard as it is for people of my vintage to believe, that's 9 years ago.
yeah,
So there's a
right,
lot
yeah,
more miles on the tread of those tires. And who was a guy? I can't recall for sure how old Chris is. I don't think he's
I
50
bet he's
yet.
50.
Maybe he
I bet
is.
he's close.
He's
Yeah, I
real
bet he's
close if
close.
he's not.
Yeah,
But yeah, so a guy, who in the flush of that first tournament season was maybe 42. Well, now maybe he's 50. Okay, that's different. That's
yep,
a that's and it doesn't mean that you can't move jobs at that point, but it does mean you're probably not as attractive to the kind of program you would think it would take to get him to move. That's the other thing too, is let's not sell it short. Depending upon where your where your ego sits, Northwestern's a pretty damn good job because you're in the Big Ten.
yep,
He's proven you've obviously got enough in the way of resources to be competitive, at least when you're cycling up. And yet, he doesn't really have heat on him.
no,
Make
no,
the tournament once every 3 years at Northwestern. That's enough. He could coach there
yeah,
indefinitely at that
yeah,
rate. And I don't know. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he has enough of an ego to say, no, I want to win everything. I mean, most of these guys do, but he doesn't appear to be posturing for that,
right,
for that kind of ego move. And I do think, for as much as we're saying kind things about him, I think we'd both be very surprised if we ever see Chris Collins with a Final Four team or a true national title contender. I think there are limitations at Northwestern. You know,
Yeah.
for example, um, they actually do have academic entrance requirements
And
that are
yeah.
real, as opposed to the joke song and dance you occasionally see the program down the road try to trot out. That's utter
Right.
bullshit and false. But Northwestern, as opposed to anybody else in the Big Ten, really does have those. So there are guys out there that they would not be able, Chris Collins would not be able to get admitted. That's true. They're one of the few schools in Division One you could say that about. So I think that puts maybe a cap on what they can do. But if he likes being at home, being in a place he can compete, job security. I mean, there's a lot to argue for staying, and I just don't see any reason to think that he's likely to move. The other part of that, of course, is the one place you might say, yeah, maybe maybe that would be a place he'd go, is his alma mater. But with the way John Shire has started, that
Yeah.
sure doesn't seem likely that job's going to open up anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly places like Kansas comes calling, or Kentucky,
Yeah,
or
but the odds of that are
UCLA.
that's I just don't think I don't see him in line for a blue blood job other than
Yeah.
his
No.
alma mater. And that one is not going to, I don't see him as, despite the fact, as you pointed out, there occasionally you'll see whenever Northwestern's had a good year, you'll start to see some Michigan State fans talk about Chris Collins. I don't believe that for a minute. I don't think he'd ever,
Yeah.
and that's not knocking him. It's just I have no good reason to believe that he would be a candidate for the
Yeah.
job there. So I don't see him as a guy that the bloods would be a threat to get. And if they're not going to, then where would he go? Is
Right.
moving to,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, taking the job at, well, like Iowa, like you had suggested. Is
Yeah.
that a
That's
move that would make sense? Is that really a huge step up for him? I don't think so. To uproot your family, be in a different situation, different people you're working with, all that. I just don't see it.
especially if you like the city. I mean, I think that's probably one of my
Yeah.
guesses. That's one of the appeals too. And
And it's home.
Northwestern's small potatoes in Chicago, but as far as universities, it's probably the biggest program. I mean, DePaul's nothing, right? And so you're pretty much the
These
biggest college
days, yeah,
program in town.
for as
You know,
much as it matters, they could probably lay claim to being kings of Chicago, although
they,
there'd probably be a pretty good argument the actual kings of Chicago would be Illinois or Indiana or Michigan, or
yeah,
some other
Michigan
Big
State or
Ten
something.
school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, for sure. All right. Well, all this talk of moving just reminds me of, if you're out there trying to move around, no better place to go than Nudge Printing. It's very comfortable, easy to breathe. T-shirts, sweatshirts, whatever it might be. Nudge Printing should be your place to go. Make sure you're on the email list. So go over to nudgeprinting.com. Get on the email list. That way, Gabe can notify you when he's got flash sales. He just had one today. We're recording this much in the future, so it's already gone. But he has them all the time, and there's all kinds of things you can get there. Obviously, you get your stuff for football season, for basketball, for hockey, whatever it might be, golf, logoed quarter zips, baseball hats, jackets, as it's now entering fall. So make sure you get all that stuff. 20% off as listener to the show for just really great apparel at nudgeprinting.com. Make sure you just type Final Four as one word at checkout to get that great deal. So we'll begin with the players departing, and obviously we're just going to go through the ones that are key players departing and those retained by the Wildcats. Brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. We'll begin with the most important one, probably, is Brooks Barnhiser. His final season in Evanston kind of came to a terrible end in that with his foot injury. He averaged 17.1 points a game, team high 8.8 rebounds a game, second in total assists almost. And that's even with missing half the games. Shot 41, 27, and 76. So obviously his three-point shooting was not as good last year. I think that's probably partly because of his injury. But he ended up going in the NBA draft, which is pretty good for a Northwestern Wildcat, especially a guy coming off an injury. So good luck to Brooks, I guess, in the next level.
Yeah, he's the first player Collins has had who was drafted. Uh, Tough road to hoe, getting drafted by Oklahoma City, the current NBA champion. So You would think not an easy roster to make, but I would assume, given that he was a second round choice, probably a a two-way guy, G League
Right.
kind of deal. I haven't followed up on any of that, but yeah, really good player. And he was one of the guys I was talking about where you look at the development year on year from Brooks Barnhiser, and it was really impressive what he did. He went from early in his career, he was a guy where you would see flashes. He was part of the rotation, but not a major impact guy, to just gradually getting more responsibility, a bigger role, and then the last 2 years, really impressive stuff. And last year was heading to be a great season, and then he got a foot injury against Michigan State, and that was that. But yeah, great season, great career, no doubt about any of that. And we'll see how he goes as a pro.
Then we move along to Jalen Leach. Also, as mentioned before, he also was injured a few weeks after Barnhiser, and he came from Fairfield. He was averaging 14.3 points a game at 45, 39, 87. Had about a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. So he was a key part of their team, and another huge loss for them with the injuries.
Yeah, Northwestern was an interesting team last year in that when Barnhiser was in there, so for the first half of the year, they really ran their offense through him.
Yeah.
He was, either their three or their four, depending upon. He and Martinelli were kind of, at least to my eyes, were interchangeable in that way. But they ran, as you mentioned, Barnhiser was the second leading assist guy on the team. I'm talking total assists, despite missing half the season. So he was clearly their playmaker. But Leach was a decent. That's the thing. They lacked a legit Big Ten caliber point guard. Um, and so Leach was the closest thing they had to that. And he was okay in that regard, but where his value really lied was in his shooting. He gave
Mm-hmm.
them a legit perimeter threat, but then he went down just a couple weeks after Barnhiser, and that was that. Like at that
Yeah.
point, there was no realistic way Northwestern was going to be able to rally enough to get to the tournament. Now, they did. It's 7 of their 13 Big Ten losses came by 6 points or less, which means in the modern game, 2 possessions. So they were
Yeah.
right there, even without Barnhiser and Leach. But you lose guys like that. I mean, that between the two of them, you're talking about 31, 32 points a game. You're just Northwestern's not going to have the depth to overcome that. Few teams are, but definitely Northwestern didn't.
Right. And then finally, we have Ty Berry, a guy who is a kind of an enigma. He was a guy who did flashes of like, this is going to be a breakout year. And I feel like as a sophomore year, where really he kind of made a big
It
splash.
was. It was.
And then last year, he just didn't quite live up to billing. I think he was injured a little bit last year too. And then this year, I mean, you look at his numbers, he shot 40, 39, 79. He averaged 10.6 points a game, but you just didn't feel like his impact in the game was what you had projected potentially could have been when his after his sophomore year.
Well, I think that they thought that he might be one of their next great guards, and instead he
Right.
ended up being a solid one. He had a tough couple years with injuries. He finally was healthy last year, and at least the efficiency was good. Maybe didn't have enough volume, didn't take enough shots to make a
Yeah.
bigger impact, but um, he was a solid player for them. Certainly gave them reliable jump shooting. He could handle the ball a little bit, although I never felt he really developed into an actual point guard. But overall, solid 5 year career for them.
All right, and that brings us to the returnees, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, friends. If you got a new home like Rod here, he's in the midst of moving stuff around, moving stuff around. My least
Ugh,
favorite thing is moving, and I
yeah, I'm there with you.
and you want your windows clean, make sure they're all nice when you're moving to the new house. Contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They do fantastic work. Or if you want to sell your house and you want your windows to not look all grimy, or the side of your house, make sure you get it power washed. Squeegee Squad Grand Rapids, great choice. Rod doesn't have a choice in the greater Detroit area, but we do here on the west side of the state. So make sure you contact them today. You can go to their support page and find ways to get a hold of Troy and his team. at tffinots.com/support. There you can get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. And again, it's the larger Greater Grand Rapids area, very big region. Contact them today. They do fantastic work. You'll be super happy with it. And then you can do something fun or maybe not fun and moving, but either way. It's, uh, obviously the key returnee, as we mentioned before, is Nick Martinelli. He was a sidekick, and he was pretty much like almost like another twin for Barnhiser, 6'7", 225-pound senior now, averaging 20.5 points a game, 6.2 rebounds a game, 47, 33, 73. And guy can handle the ball a little bit. I sort of struggle. I want to call him a try-hard guy in some respects because he just is like effort is maximal all the time, but it's not like he doesn't have any skill or talents or anything like that. So I think it's probably not a fair
I think a
way to
better
describe
yeah.
him. But I think the fact that he leaves everything on the court every time he plays is my impression.
That's true. I would definitely not call him a try-hard guy because at least the way I use that usually has a meaning that, well, the effort level's great, but there's a cap on the talent. Nick Martinelli is one of the most accomplished players in the Big Ten at this stage. So it's not that. But I think what you can say is that his motor is a skill. It's one of the things that makes him so productive. But he really does some of everything for them. I don't think he's quite as good a passer as Barnhiser was, but they will run offense through him at times. He's capable of doing that. Good shooter, and when the three is dropping, pretty tough to guard this guy.
Yeah.
Because he's big enough and strong enough to operate in the post some. He's very good in the mid-range. He's also a very fundamentally sound and clever offensive player in terms of getting to his spots and making plays. So, look, the role he's going to play, he's as important to his team as anybody in the Big Ten, any one individual, easily. And if they were to be on the downside of some unfortunate injury luck again this year, and Martinelli went out for any appreciable amount of time, game over. I mean, they need Nick Martinelli to be healthy, and they need him to be the player that everybody thinks he can be. I wouldn't rule out that Nick Martinelli could make a run at Big Ten Player of the Year honors. Now, a lot would have to break right. Northwestern would have to have a good team, a good season as a team.
Yeah.
And, we would agree they're probably not a team that's likely to win a Big Ten title. So then you'd also have to hope that maybe on whoever wins the Big Ten title, there's not an obvious candidate. Some things would have to break the right way, but I don't rule it out. And I absolutely don't rule out that he could be a first-team all-league guy. He easily could be with what he's capable of doing, the numbers that he's going to put up and the efficiency he plays with. Absolutely has a shot at that.
Yeah, Northwestern at least last year had the luxury of having two, like a Martinelli and a Barnhiser sort of.
They were
so they could kind of lose one and survive a little bit, but this year, I feel like they don't have that.
It got lost because Barnhiser got hurt, relatively early in conference play. He probably, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm guessing he probably only played maybe 6 games in the league or something, 6 or 7. But when he was healthy, Northwestern had the best forward combination of any team in the league. Easily. By a long shot, I would say. If we're not talking centers. We're talking purely forwards, guys who could play the 3 or the 4. Nobody was better when those guys were healthy.
Yeah, the size, and they could score from multiple levels. I mean, it's hard to.
Just look at the numbers. Just look at the numbers they put up. They combined for almost 40 points a game.
Yeah, and I feel like when Barnhiser went down, Martinelli was about the same. I think they were almost identical. Like one was 16.9, was 17.1 points a game, and then I think Martinelli kicked up a little bit once Barnhiser was out.
Because he had to. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so other returning, and this is another thing, to credit to Collins, is that you see a lot of returning players for Northwestern, and you don't see that in lots of teams in the Big Ten. So,
hello?
Yep. You hear me? You still there, Rod?
Eric?
Oh, did you go? I can hear you.
Okay, there we go.
All right, I can hear you.
Okay.
Technology, love it. The new house, right? So we're down to KJ Wyndham, 6'3" sophomore guard from Indianapolis. He ended up playing a little bit more just because of the injuries, and he also did pretty well. He averaged 5.6 points a game, had a 2.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio, shooting 38, 31, and 80. And so there's reason to think that he could really bring some more, and also another credit to him, or at least an indication that he might be able to bring a little more to the team this year. When Leach went down, he ended up playing a little more minutes, and he ended up getting over 10.5 points a game in the last 10 games. So, I mean, there's a lot there potentially to really help.
That was the really good sign. If you're looking for reasons to buy in on KJ Wyndham, the way he closed the season when he got handed a bigger role, that's what you would point to if you're wanting to be in the optimistic camp. But I think he showed enough that you've got to believe he's going to have a shot to start. If not at the point, then definitely in a guard role. The shooting was okay, not gangbusters, but we talk about how freshmen frequently have
Right.
difficulty making that adjustment right away. It takes a little bit of time. So, yeah, I was impressed by him, what I saw, in thinking that, yeah, this is a guy who could end up being a productive player for them. And again, we talked about Chris Collins' MO when he's been there, over his tenure. A lot of guys get better. It's a sign of a good developmental program. So Wyndham would be a guy that you'd look at and say, much like Barnhiser and Martinelli showed flashes as true freshmen, Wyndham showed flashes. So you hope that, oh, as a sophomore, maybe he's a starter and a 10-point a night guy. That would be kind of the progression that we've seen other guys at Northwestern make.
Then we had Jordan Clayton, 6'2 junior. He was redshirting, but because of all the injuries, he ended up playing the last 10 games, and that where he averaged 4.7 points a game, 2.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio, just like Wyndham, and had a 35, 28, and 100 shooting. So not nearly as good outside shooter as Wyndham, but showed some ability to score a little bit at least.
Well, and I think he showed that he can at least competently run an offense.
Right. Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
he's going to definitely factor in. It's unfortunate for him they had to take the red shirt off, but they just had no choice when the injuries hit. They needed him to play, and as we talked about, he was part of the reason that they were able to at least remain competitive. They didn't get as many wins as they would have liked. They were competitive even after those two starters went down, and Clayton was part of the reason why. I think he's going to factor into the rotation somewhere. I'm not sure whether that's in a starter's role though. It kind of depends on what we see, I think, from some of the new guys as to what his exact role is, but he's going to play.
Then we have Justin Mullins, 6'6 senior, averaged 4.4 points a game, 3.2 rebounds a game, played about 21 minutes, shot 47, 30, and 56.
The thing that I would guess Chris Collins likes about him, besides the experience as a senior, is he's 6'6". And we know that, especially in recent years, really, even if you go back to the early stages of his program, Chris Collins has always had a role for that rangy, long wing who could be disruptive defensively. And Mullins, I think, is that. He was third on the team in steals. So he's shown a propensity to be kind of a problem for offenses when he's out there playing passing lanes and harassing people. So again, another guy like Clayton, I'm pretty sure he's going to factor into the rotation. I'm just not sure how large the role is going to be. I could see his minutes maybe decreasing a little bit from the 21 he played last year, but maybe not. It'll depend on what some of the newcomers show.
And then another retained player is Angelo Charvino, 6'6", 200-pound sophomore. He averaged 3.1 points a game, 11 rebound in 11 minutes as a freshman. Shot 40, 29, and 68.
This is the guy. I know I said it about Wyndham,
This is your
but
next
Charvino is
next.
the guy. I think he's got a chance to be that next in the Barnhiser Martinelli path of development. Now, he's a little smaller than either of those guys were, so I'm not saying he's a clone, but it just watching him again, especially post the injuries, when he started to play a little more significant role, it just felt to me like, yeah, this guy's numbers aren't great, but you can see the beginnings, the inklings of something. So I won't be surprised. Again, not sure where in the rotation, but he's going to be there just because I think he's one of those guys that seems to be the type that Collins looks for.
And finally, for team players, we have Blake Smith, 6'6" senior, played in 18 games, didn't play a whole lot.
Yeah, and with the depth that they have in their perimeter group, I think it's unlikely that Smith is likely to see an uptick in playing time. That would be my guess.
All right, that brings us to the newcomers to Northwestern, brought to you by the Brothers Just Your Gutters. If you've got a new place, maybe like a new house, huh, Rod? You can
Yeah.
make sure your gutters are operational. Contact the Brothers Just Your Gutters. They can make sure everything's working properly and make sure you got those leaf guards in so you don't have to deal with those leaves this fall. You can head on over to our support page to find ways to contact them, whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state. You get 10% off. You just mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. Again, that's at tffinots.com/support. The brothers will replace, repair, or even or just clean out your gutters, whatever you need done. They'll get on the ladder so you don't have to, and you can do something fun like, empty boxes. Moving on then to the first newcomer is Jaden Reed, 5'10", junior transfer from Southern Florida, where he averaged 12.6 points a game on 39, 36, and 79 shooting. Also 3.6 assists per game, but he also had about 2.5 turnovers, so not close to a 2-to-1 assist turnover ratio.
Yeah, that's the bit that gives you pause, right?
Mm-hmm.
3.6 assists, but 2.5 turnovers. That says, and you see these kind of guys where, yeah, they're dynamic. They make a lot of things happen, but they also make a lot of things happen for the other team.
A lot of things are happening.
Despite that, I think it's a pretty safe bet that he's going to be the lead guard. I mean, it's possible it could be Wyndham. I guess it's theoretically possible it could be Clayton. Those guys seem to, at least in terms of the track record, have been much sounder in their decision making. But Reed seems to be the dynamic guy here, and the shooting obviously is a plus. 36% on threes last year, averaged almost 13 points a night. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
That's what you want to see. And so, and also keep in mind, as a freshman, he shot 48% from three. So there's a shooter in there. Now, he's only 5'10". That's the
Yeah,
other
right.
reason I think, Northwestern might be smaller in the backcourt than they ideally would like to be. If you started Wyndham and Reed, for example, you'd be 5'10", 6'1" at two spots. You can do that, but it makes some things defensively a challenge. But I just don't see a reason at this point to think that Reed is not the guy when November comes around.
Next, we have Max Green. He's 6'6", sophomore transfer from Holy Cross, where he averaged 14.9 points a game, 5.6 rebounds a game, and 3.5 assists per game as the Patriot League freshman of the year. He shot 42, 38, and 70 in the season. So, I mean, again, bringing some shooting, it looks like maybe Collins has got something here.
Yeah, I think he's set to have a major role. The only way he wouldn't is if the shooting just absolutely fell off a cliff, and he can't reproduce at least something reasonably close to what he did at Holy Cross. The other thing I like about it from a Northwestern perspective is you're getting a guy who was freshman of the year. That means he's got 3 years of eligibility left. So,
Mm-hmm.
and we occasionally we talk about this. Like, I think all else being equal, the sounder way to go in the portal is if you can get guys who have multiple years left. That's going to be better because it means you're not living in the portal the way, say, Brad Underwood is. You
Right.
know, I guess he's not exclusively the portal. He's now moved on to European freshmen as well, but you get the point.
Yes, it's
It
international
gives
for him.
you it gives you a chance to still build that kind of continuity in your program that was traditionally there with high school based recruiting. And so from that perspective, you really have to like the addition, in addition to the shooting and the size. At 6'6", I just talked about how you could see Northwestern starting perimeter lineup maybe being small. If they did start Wyndham and Reed, you've almost got to have somebody in the 6'5", 6'6" range just to give you some kind of chance to deal with, say you're playing Michigan State and you got Cohen Carr as the starting three. You've got to have somebody that's got a chance of guarding him physically, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that would make it imperative that they would have to go bigger. And so Max Green would be a candidate from that perspective. But again, 38% shooting from three, took half his shots from out there last year. And the other thing is word on him, and we'll see how well this translates, but supposedly he was a tough shot taker and a tough shot maker. That, and you never know for sure, but all else being equal, that would suggest to me he might have a better chance than most of having those numbers translate to the Big Ten level. Because we
Sure.
know he's going to be guarded better than he was at Holy Cross. But if he's got a knack for hitting contested shots, well, you would hope that would carry over. So definitely a name to watch.
Then we have a Rinson Page, 6'10", 250-pound transfer from Cincinnati. Played his first year at USC. So he has a couple years left, just like you were talking about with Green, where he averaged 3.5 points a game, 2.3 rebounds a game, played just 9 minutes, shot 49 and 44 and 63, although the 3-point shooting was pretty limited, and about a half a block a game.
Yeah. They needed size, right? I mean,
Yeah.
just bottom
Yes.
line. That Matt Nicholson left. Um, I think Luke Hunger transferred. So they lost their big men. And we all know in the Big Ten, you got to at least, you don't have to have a superstar at the five, but you've got to have somebody who can give you a chance physically against those guys. And so adding someone like Page was, you know, they desperately needed size. That's why they added him. The numbers are pretty pedestrian, but
Yeah.
the physical numbers, 6'10", 250, aren't. So they took him, though, primarily because they liked the way he showed up defensively at Cincinnati. And so, again, that's look at what they had last year in Matt Nicholson. Matt Nicholson was not a scorer. You know,
No.
he would get you an opportunistic bucket or two a game, but that was it. He was in there because he understood their defensive scheme very well. He played his role within it very well, and he gave them a physical matchup in the paint, a guy who could stand toe to toe with the big men who abound in this conference. And that's what Page is that's why Page is there. And again, it's important to note he's not just a big body. They actually, from what I understand, were pretty impressed with the way he was able to play at Cincinnati out on the floor. So by that, it means they're not going to be wed to having to play drop coverage and pick and roll. If you
Right.
remember how Nicholson played, Nicholson was actually pretty good against pick and roll stuff. So they have reason to think that Page can be similar.
Well, someone who's definitely not pedestrian, at least on paper, is Trey Singleton. That's their 6'8", 220-pound freshman coming from Indiana. He was a top 100 recruit. And yeah, I mean, he's got to be one of the highest recruits they've had for,
The
I don't know
highest.
how long. The highest ever.
The
Okay, there you
highest.
go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, with him, there's not one area that stands out for him. He's a good but not great shooter. Decent size and athletic ability, but not overwhelming. He's not 6'11", or he's not Cohen Carr. Um, but they think he can measure up early on defensively. So that alone should allow him to play significant minutes early on. This is a very large freshman class as we're going to go through.
Right.
Singleton is the obvious pick to be a guy to make an early impact, probably as a four-man. I mean, it kind of, you wonder about how many minutes are there because Martinelli is the four in this setup, but I think Singleton's going to play there. I've even seen some speculative talk that he might be able to play some small ball five, but he's going to get onto
Okay.
the floor.
Well, a guy who you think would get on the floor just because of size as well is Cade Bennerman, 7-footer, but only 210 pounds from Nashville, 7'5" wingspan. So, boy, that is pretty impressive. So I imagine rim protector, probably some back buckets inside, but it's going to be tough for him defensively if he's that weak, I think, probably, at least initially, early in the season.
One of the reasons they talk about Singleton as maybe a small ball five option is that there have to be questions about how ready Bennerman is from a physical
Right.
perspective. You know, the tools are there. I mean, you can't teach 7 feet, you can't teach 7'5" wingspan, and they also like his ability to shoot. So they think in time he could actually be. I don't know if we know yet whether he can be a true stretch option, but he could be a skilled offensive player. The bottom line would seem to be uh, at what point is he strong enough to hold his ground in this league? And I don't
Yeah.
know whether or not that's going to come this year, but they're bullish on his future.
Next, we have Tyler Kropp, 6'9", 220-pound freshman from Ohio. Played for Argentina's FIBA U19 World Championship team, and he led the tournament scoring. He was fourth in rebounding, so that's pretty good.
Well, yeah, and it was. I mean, he was decently well thought of, but he wasn't a top 100 guy or anything. And then he has some familial connection. I think his mother is Argentinian.
Yeah, Kropp does
Plays
not
for
sound Argentinian, but
right. Plays for Argentina. Well, there's a German population
I
there
was gonna
though.
say, yeah, that's right. There's a
Um,
very German
but
expatriate. Yeah,
right. Well, yeah, post World War II. But take a guess who they were.
yeah,
But
right. Yeah, yeah,
but in any event, he plays for Argentina in the under 19 World Championships, and he just killed it. I mean, he was sensational. That's a good and really what we're talking about. It varies because as we know, some guys who come over from Europe now as freshmen can be like 22 years old. So you
right,
don't
right.
know. So there's a variety, but under 19, you're getting there's definitely a few guys around college basketball that played in that event. And for him to lead it in scoring and be fourth in rebounding, hey, this is another guy who could be a small ball five option. Hey, if he's really that good, maybe he even starts and at the five
Sure.
and Page is your backup, you know? Yeah, obviously a lot to determine. And if he had not had that FIBA experience this summer, what we would probably be saying is, yeah, he's a guy they think can, develop into maybe a stretch big at some point, either the four or the five,
Right.
might be able to carve out a role. The way he played in that tournament has some people thinking, well, maybe he's able to contribute a lot more than that, but we don't know yet. But I would say do not rule out that he is a significant part of this rotation. Not yet.
Then we have a couple freshman guards. We begin with Phoenix Gill, 6'2", from, and as you may recognize last name, son of Kendall Gill, and I guess Kendall he played at Illinois, right? So it
That's
seems
right.
he
He
ended
was
up at,
part of the Flying
yeah, right. I
Alignment,
was gonna say,
the late
yeah,
'80s.
I guess, and of course they are rivals, but only geographically. I feel like they're not really rivals, Illinois and
Right.
Northwestern.
It's not Michigan State.
No, it's certainly, yeah, just we happen to be close to each other in the same state.
Right. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I never got the sense Illinois was really in that recruitment in any serious way, so that
Well, he's not a
explains it.
transfer, so no, I'm just kidding. That's a cheap shot.
Right. Well, that's and he's not from Serbia or Lithuania.
Slovenia. Yeah.
Eastern Europe. Yeah, he's not from Eastern Europe. So, but I do think the sense I've gotten is he's not the prospect his dad. I mean, Kendall Gill, for those
Yeah.
who are old enough to remember, and he was my age actually, so I remember him very very well. Is my age, I should say. Kendall Gill was legit. Had a
Yeah.
had a nice NBA career. Was unbelievable at Illinois. He was everything you wanted in a guard. He was physically put together, super athletic, good ball skills. I mean, he had the total package. So, it's not a surprise that you might say, well, maybe the son comes up a little bit short by comparison. He's
Yeah.
not the same level of prospect that his dad was. His dad was an all high school All American, but Phoenix is a kid that they like. He is athletic. They like his physical tools. They actually think he could be a point guard down the line. But with this team, obviously, we've talked about several guys who have a little more experience. It's hard to imagine there's a big role available for him right now. So he's more of a developmental guy, but one with some real potential.
And finally, another freshman guard, 6'3", from Philadelphia, Jake West, who I imagine is another possibility for point guard sometime in the near future.
Point guard possibility, and he's also a shooter. So they say. So again, I think there's potential here, but it's probably going to be down the line because there are a lot of guys in front of him. I know
All right,
this
so that,
much. If
yeah,
if if either of these guys do manage to somehow get into the rotation, it almost certainly means the other one doesn't. There's no way there's room for two. I tend to think there's not room for one, but we'll see.
right. Well, and I think, we're entering that zone of predictions as far as placement in the Big Ten, where there's, 14th. I think you have Northwestern 14th. It's very possible that the ninth place team has a difference of one game, one more win in the Big Ten. I mean, they could be very clumped closely together. So there'd be almost no separation between a lot of these teams. And
Yep.
certainly looking at these teams, there are a lot of pieces like we have, I feel like a lot of years where like you could kind of envision this being a lot better team or maybe not nearly as good just by one or two players just not being sort of living up to billing or exceeding what you're expecting. But some intriguing parts, and so you can all I think you can convince yourself this team could maybe make the bubble of the NCAA tournament if the things kind of you go the right way.
Yeah, I think you start with Martinelli, and that's a
Sure.
great place to start. When you have a guy who's a potential first team all league player and can do all the things that he does well, man, that's where you want to be. So they've got that. Presuming health, that's a total impact player. I would probably, I mean, it's early and there can always be surprises, but if I was a betting man and I were trying to figure out who's going to be likely to lead the Big Ten in scoring, I'd probably put my money on him. And we know he's going to do other things too. So the questions come in around, well, what else besides that do you have? And there are reasons to be excited about this team if you're a Northwestern fan. I think, we talked about Wyndham and Garavino showing real potential as freshmen. And as we discussed, guys who do that in this program often become much bigger contributors as sophomores.
Mm-hmm.
Clayton and Mullins also at least give you experience. These are guys, I mean, Mullins played 21 minutes a game last year, right? So there's the potential that they can help and they know what Chris Collins needs out of his guards. And then you look at especially adding Reed and Green from the portal takes the floor of that backcourt up a couple notches, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
If for no other reason than both of those guys have given you reason to believe that they can be shooting factors. Because Northwestern needs that. Losing Leach and losing Barry, you lost a lot of shooting, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're trying to replace some of that. You've got two guys brought in who should be able to help. And so I think when I look at their guard play overall, I think it's going to be pretty solid. There's probably not a boo booey there.
Yeah.
But are there collectively, could they get to where that group got last year when everybody was healthy? Yeah, I think so. I think there's a possibility of that. So you feel good about that. You feel really good about Martinelli at the four. I think the big unknown comes into play at the five. So what do you have? Well, you have a transfer from Cincinnati who they like in terms of his defensive potential, but has never really been any kind of offensive weapon. That might be okay. If you've got
Yeah.
enough scoring other than him, you might be able to get away with that. And then you have these two freshmen, Singleton, who is the highest rated recruit in the modern era to come into this program. That's says something. And Crop, who had a dynamite under 19 world championships. And then you also have Bennerman, who's at least got, 7'5" wingspan is 7'5" wingspan. Now, I think there's reason to wonder can he hang in there physically at only 210 pounds, but you can't rule it out completely. So, although there are question marks at that position, there's enough there to think that maybe they can cobble together an answer. Um, so, I think the big change to me is that when I look at this team, I think Chris Collins has something to work with that he has rarely had at his disposal, which is depth. You
Yeah.
can look at this team and imagine pretty easily a high quality 9-man rotation. I don't think that takes a lot of squinting to see that he could have 9 guys that he feels pretty comfortable with in terms of playing some real minutes, and not seeing production drop off much, if at all. I expect that they'll be tough defensively because his teams usually are pretty good there.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it just comes down to, can they get enough offense around Martinelli to get back to tournament play? That's
Yeah.
really it. And, right now, I would say where I've got them picked, you would probably argue they're a little bit on the outside looking in, but not by much. And it wouldn't be a shocker to see them be good enough to be in the mix come middle of March.
Well, and certainly too, the one thing we, haven't, but there's no way of knowing at this point is, where the conference ranks amongst other conferences. You suddenly have a successful
Yep.
non-conference schedule for the Big Ten, and now you're, instead of getting 10 teams, you're getting 13 or 12, and now there's you're not very far away from getting in, even though you may not have a great conference, run. You might just be sort of middle of the pack.
I think it's, and you're right that we have no way of knowing yet how conference strength is going to play out, but I think it's reasonable to assume that the Big Ten, especially now that we're down to 5 major conferences,
Right.
it's hard for me to imagine the Big Ten being any worse than third overall. I just think the ACC has slipped so much that it's really, outside of Duke and sometimes North Carolina, maybe Louisville's bouncing back, but not much else.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the SEC, the Big 12, the Big 10, and then the Big East. But again, it's hard for me to imagine the Big 10 being worse than third, and they could be the best league. You don't know yet when it's all said and done. So I think that if we assume that it's at least the third best league, you're probably talking about, and again, this is guesswork, but that's what we're doing here, right? The whole exercise is guesswork. You're probably talking about a minimum 9, 10 bid league.
Sure.
I think that's realistic. And that would mean Northwestern would be on the outside looking in, but not way off the pace, as you noted. The difference between 14th and 10th might be a game.
Yeah, right.
Now, it's a
Exactly.
more
Very close.
complicated picture than that, of course, because the conference record doesn't mean much
Yeah,
necessarily.
depends who you beat
But
and where you beating them. All the sorts of
we're
questions.
using that as a proxy, though, to argue for the point, like, where does this team fit? And I think it's fair enough to say from here on out, everybody we're going to discuss, and I think even the last team we discussed, Nebraska, that's probably about where I would start the line. Everybody from here on out has a realistic thought at this stage of being good enough to be there come March.
Right.
I think we're
Yeah.
not talking about teams that you look at and just say, man, I can't imagine a path for them. I can imagine a path for Northwestern. It's harder maybe than with some other programs, but I can see it.
All right. Well, that we'll wrap it up there, and we'll come back for the next show, the number 13 team. So stay tuned for that. Again, just as a reminder, head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support, where you can find ways to reach all our great sponsors, work, whether it's gutter work on your house as far as getting your windows cleaned, or if you want to get some great Spartan apparel, other things there too. You can kind of scroll through there if you want to support the show. We greatly appreciate that as well. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.